The draw knife presents some interesting challenges for sharpening. Because of its blade length and the way the handles are, it can be a challenge to fit onto a typical bench grinder. As you can see, if I were to try to grind it here on my little 6-inch grinder, the handle really gets in the way of the motor. Now, some folks will dress their wheel at an angle and also use the draw knife at an angle. Pete Galbert came up with a jig a number of years ago that fits onto a tool rest on a grinder, usually a larger grinder. I don't particularly like that method, working at an angle on my grinder, but it does work if you've got to remove a lot of material. There'll be a link in the description below to Pete's video. But for most draw knife users, they can be sharpened by hand, even a fairly major sharpening. Now, putting your bench stone on a bench, the handles still often get in the way, so I like to use a vise, either a bench vise or in this case, my pattern maker's or carver's vise from Woodcraft. I'm going to clamp my diamond plate. This is a coarse 320 grit diamond plate into the vise. And now I can hold my draw knife like so. And we're going to be sharpening the bevel side. So a draw knife typically will have a flat side or almost flat side and a bevel side. Most of our sharpening is going to be done from that bevel, and then we'll simply polish the flat side. Now, as I said in our introductory video, the first secret to sharpening is a consistent angle, maintaining a consistent angle. And in this case, we're going to use body mechanics and practice to get a consistent angle. So I'm going to lay the bevel down on my diamond plate, starting here at the heel, and then I'm going to rock forward toward the toe until I can feel it contact. And that's our spot. We want to maintain that angle. So what I'll do is hold the handles with my hands, and I'm going to tuck my elbows in tight to my sides and find that spot, and then I'll just move my whole body back and forth, maintaining that angle. And I'll turn it and check, and I can see where I've been taking material off and make sure that I have a good contact all the way across. Another technique I really like to use is take a marker, and I can blacken this whole edge. And this will show up very quickly what I've taken off and what still needs to be sharpened. This just is a great visual aid, so you're not relying just on the scratch marks. All right, so we'll go back to our plate here. Or on the heel. So we'll keep going until we have a nice bevel. And we turn a burr to the back side. That's where when we sharpen all the way to what we call a zero edge, that is where the plane of the bevel and the plane of the back meet, then the little tiny thin bit of metal folds over on away from the side we're sharpening. That's called a burr or a wire edge. Once that wire edge appears, that's as far as we need to sharpen with that particular grit. Then we'll remove the wire edge, remove that burr, and go on to the next finer grit. And we're making progress. We still need to go a little bit more onto the cutting edge. With these diamond stones, I use them dry, but they do periodically need to be cleaned off. You can see we're building up all this swarf from our the metal that we're abrading off the draw knife. So I'm going to take this and rinse it off with water and clean it. Here we are back with our cleaned diamond plate. I'll work a little bit more in this section, out here on this corner. Get the rest of that bevel sharpened. Oh, I can feel a difference now. I don't know if you can hear that, but I can certainly feel a difference with this cleaned stone. Your diamond stones really need to be cleaned often to get rid of all that swarth. And even your oil stones should be cleaned periodically. With the oil stones, I'll typically use kerosene to clean them out. Notice that I'm rocking my entire body back and forth. This helps to maintain that angle without rolling it too badly. Now for a draw knife, I actually like a very slight convex bevel. I think it gives great strength and really good cutting performance. We're using our draw knives regularly for fitting our tool handles, and we're carving kiln-dried hickory, which is really, really hard. And so that slight convex edge holds up quite well to carving the hickory. But for most folks, if you try to maintain a perfectly flat bevel, you'll end up with ever so slight convex, which is just fine on a draw knife. I'm going to feel for the burr. I'm just starting to get a little bit of a burr. We need to go a little bit farther though. The temptation is always to tilt your blade just a little more and sharpen just that very edge and get a micro bevel that is at a steeper angle. You'll very quickly get your blade sharp. The problem is, if you continue doing that, you'll soon have a very blunt, very rounded over edge that can't be sharpened, and you have to go back and grind a lot of material off. So it's best to focus on maintaining the edge you have, even though it takes a little bit longer. In the long run, it's going to be a much better situation. This first coarsest grit is where we'll spend the most time. This is where we'll take out any small nicks. A large nick or a large chip or a big flat dull spot, we might have to go to a grinder anyway. Now that we've produced a burr all the way across the back of our draw knife, we'll switch to the next finer grit. I have a man-made stone, coarse and fine, in a little wooden box. So at this point, we can either clamp that in our vise and then use a similar technique. But what I like to do is hold the draw knife in my arms, or in my hand, brace it against my chest, and then hold the stone by hand. Let's move this vise out of the way. First, I'm going to take the burr off the back. I'm going to lay the stone flat on the back. And I'm just going to move in a circular pattern. And I feel it's been removed. Now I'll turn it over, and I'm going to work the bevel. Same way, I'm going to brace the draw knife against my chest. I'm going to brace my elbow against my side, and I'm going to hold my stone like so. And maintaining that angle, move in a circular motion. At this point, we're just eliminating scratch marks. We have our bevel established. We've come down to a zero edge. Now we're just polishing and removing the scratch marks. We're progressing from coarser to finer grits of abrasive, and what that's doing is just smoothing and polishing the surface of the metal. And the surface that's most important is right at the cutting edge. You can see how we're progressing there. Again, the marker is a good technique here to make sure that we're maintaining where we need to be. I can feel a burr again on the edge, so I'll turn it over. And another technique would be to go just in one direction. This also works quite well. I'm going to feel if I've removed that burr, and then I'm going to come back and work this side a little more. Stop. At this point, we'll just progress through finer and finer abrasives, and it really doesn't matter what abrasive you use. Some people like the little diamond paddles, small diamond stones. I've got a collection of these natural oil stones. They're like a razor hone that we can just continue using the same way. Or you can also use like a wet dry sandpaper. This is some 400 grit, which would be what we use next. And you'll need to put this on a backer, either a piece of steel, a piece of wood, or in this case, since we are going for an ever so slight convex, I'll use my strop. Now my strop is a piece of leather glued rough side out to a piece of wood. It's fairly thin and fairly stiff leather, so there's not a lot of mushiness. It's not soft. If it's really soft, it's going to produce a very rounded over edge. But this is fairly firm leather, but it will blend these lines and help us get that just slightly convex edge. Now, with your wet dry paper, you're not going to move in circles because as you come back down, the blade will cut through the paper. So we're going to cut in one direction only, moving away from the cutting edge. We'll move across and along this edge. Again, I'm maintaining the same angle using a combination of just body mechanics as well as hand-eye coordination, which, hey, we're hand tool woodworkers. We're guiding tools by hand and eye, and sharpening is not really any different. Again, we continue with this grit until the surface is polished to the degree we want and we have a wire edge. Now, let's see if we can see this wire edge here, this burr. It's important to have good lighting, and you'll see this sort of shiny edge. Here we go. And I'm going to push it with my thumb, and I'm going to push it over the other side, and you should be able to see it. And we can wiggle it, see it coming off right there. There's this shiny burr. We can wiggle it one way and the other and come right off, just to illustrate. That's not how I take the burr off, but just to illustrate. We'll turn it around this side and go again. Whoops. And now I'll look at the edge. I can see how it's progressing. This is looking nice and smooth. I don't see any nicks. The wire edge is pretty much gone. So at this point, it's a matter of deciding just how fine an edge do you want. And you can continue on down through 600 grit, 800, 1000 grit before stropping, or we can go from this 400 grit right to the strop. which will give us what I consider a very fine utility edge. This is a tool that's used for fairly rough carving, and we can spend a lot of time getting it perfectly mirror polished, but for most draw knife use, it just isn't necessary. So now from this 400 grit, we'll go to the strop. And with the strop, I've got my leather glued rough side out on the wood. It's loaded with a stropping compound, and we'll do the same thing. Maintain that same angle, and this is what's going to get our very final polish. Most of our time is going to be spent here on the bevel side. And a little bit here on the back. Now this back is theoretically flat, but it's not actually machinist flat, because if this was truly flat, and this being a knife that we use bevel up, you would have no control. So the edge is dubbed over just a tiny bit, and really not even with the sandpaper. I'll just use the strop here and put a little more pressure right on that edge. And that's about all we need, or maybe with some very, very fine sandpaper, just to make sure that that's not perfectly flat so it won't dig in. There you can see we have a nice polished surface. And at this point, we're going to go to some wood and test it. Oh, this is a great improvement. I'll check it across the whole blade. And I'll look to see if there's any tracks left in the wood, and this is leaving a very nice smooth cut across the entire blade. So there we have it. As you can see, sharpening a draw knife presents some interesting challenges that you don't have with your smaller tools like a chisel, but it is well within the scope of skill of your average hand tool woodworker. So be sharp and do great work.